This is going to be about Purim and Nazi Germany. I know it doesn't make any sense, but hopefully it will. The Megillah Esther. Megillah is a scroll. And what do you do when you unroll a scroll? You reveal something. And Esther has a connotation of something that is hidden. So Megillah Esther is the revealing of what is hidden. Much is made over the fact that the Scroll of Esther is the only book in the Tanakh that does not explicitly mention the name of Yehovah. However, the idea of Yehovah's sovereignty and his hashgacha pa'arti, or his divine providence, is clearly implied throughout the entire story. The phrase, another Hebrew phrase, Hester Panim. Hester Panim means hiding the face, and is often used when discussing the book of Esther. In the sense of the term, Hester Panim is somewhat like the sun on an overcast day. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And Yehovah's providential love is at work at all times, whether we perceive it or not. In the book of Esther, like we said, Yehovah's name is not mentioned, but his presence is everywhere in the story. And there is an amazing prophecy in the original Hebrew, which we'll bring out. Let's talk about the players. The king, his Greek name is Xerxes. His Persian name is Kasheasha, which means ruler over heroes. And his Hebrew name is Ahashverosh, which means who rules over heroes. And then we have the other player, Nazi Germany. Now, I'm not going to try and say how to say what Nazi means in German because I can't speak German, but Nazi is the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And here's a note, interesting note. Adolf Hitler was never elected by the people of Germany. He was appointed by Hindenburg because there was no clear winner in the 1932 elections in Germany. And then when we read the story of Esther, it's like one thing after another, but there's a timeline in there. Ahashverosh held his banquet in year 3 of his reign. Esther went to the king in year 7 of his reign. And Haman cast lots on the 13th day of Nisan in the 12th year, and a decree to destroy the Jews throughout the empire was issued by the king. The destruction of the Jews was planned for the 13th of Adar in year 12 of his reign. But Mordecai and Esther had a new decree issued in the 3rd month of Sivan so that the Jewish people could protect themselves. Another interesting thing I want to bring out is our president gave the Ayatollah 10 days to make a decision. And this year, if we go by the day that he gave him the ultimatum, the 10th day is the 12th of the month of Adar. So we can look for special things to happen. Now, why did a 2,000-year-old Bible book terrify the Nazis? What would make the German leadership of the 1930s despise the Jewish people with such hatred? There are some reasons given. One was the belief that the reason Germany lost the First World War was because the Jews stabbed the Germans in the back. Another belief was the German leadership's obsession with blood. They believed that the Aryan had the most pure blood of all the peoples of the earth. The ideal Aryan had pale skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair. Therefore, the Nazis should rule the world. But what is an Aryan? I looked this up. The Aryan race is believed to have originated from Central Asia near the Ural River in Kazakhstan. And they migrated to the Iranian plateau and into the northern India. In the late 19th and early 20th century, some scholars and others transformed the name Aryan into a mythical race. And they claimed that that race was superior to all other races. So in Germany, the Nazis, of course, promoted this false notion that glorified the German people as members of the Aryan race. At the same time, they denigrated the Jewish people, blacks, gypsies, as non-Aryans. Hitler called his regime the Third Reich. But why the Third? Well, the First Reich was the Holy Roman Empire, and it existed from 962 until 1806. The Second Reich was the German Empire of 1871 to 1918. The Third Reich was supposed to be a 1,000-year reign, and it only lasted a very short time, 12 years, from 1933 to 1945. After the Nazis assumed power in 1932, anti-Semitism was systematically established between 1933 and 1938. In this period, over 400 anti-Semitic laws were enacted against the Jewish people of Germany. This hatred of the Jews appears to have had its beginnings far back in history, at least back to the Persian Empire, and Haman, a prince in the realm of King Ahasuerus. Here's some summary highlights. Haman was an Agagite, a descendant of King Agag, an Amalekite. Haman wanted to exterminate all the Jews in all 127 provinces of the Persian Empire, a very large empire. Let's take a look at the empire of King Ahasuerus. First slide, please. As you can see, it's a very, very large empire. I'm going to come down and point out some things in a minute. It went from India to Ethiopia. And if you have an empire that big, what is the one thing that the ruler has to have? He has to have communications. He has to be able to talk to the 127 provinces. And they did have one. It was a courier system. The courier system of the Persian Empire was created by Cyrus the Great and improved upon by Darius, his son. It was a horse rider system, kind of like our early Pony Express. A courier could travel from one end of the empire to the other in a matter of days. The time to send a messenger from Shushan, the capital, to Sardis which was about 1,300 miles. It took about 7 to 9 days. A typical Persian courier could travel approximately 1,600 miles in just a couple of weeks. The unofficial motto of the United States Postal Service came from the Greek historian Herodotus in his description of the Persian courier system, where it was neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stay these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. As you can see, this is Shushan, or Susa. That was the winter palace. The summer palace was at a place called Persepolis, which is right here. Now, this red line went from Sardis to Shushan, and that took 7 to 9 days. So when they put out an edict, it only took him a matter of about 2 weeks, and the whole empire had it. We know about this area here. This is the Straits of Hormuz. We're having a lot of stuff there. And I was stationed right there in Bahrain. Next slide, please. I found this. This is interesting. This is the town of Susa, or Shushan. And then you had a citadel, a higher elevated area, which was the royal city, the Acropolis, and King Ahasuerus' palace. But what I like about this is in Daniel chapter 8, you hear about Daniel in Shushan at the Ulai Canal. I never knew where the Ulai Canal was. This dotted line is the Ulai Canal. So now I have a visual. When they talk about it, I know what they're talking about. Next slide, please. This is an artist's rendition of what the palace at Shushan would have looked like. A few things. This is the king's gate. This is where Mordecai would have stood. And this is the 3 courtyards. This is the large courtyard. This is the courtyard that Haman would have been in when he was waiting to see the king about the destruction of the Jews. This courtyard, didn't say what it was, but this building here is the treasury for the king. The next courtyard is the inner courtyard. It's highly restricted because when you're in that courtyard, you look straight in, you're looking at the throne of King Ahasuerus. So it's very restricted who's there. That's where Esther would have stood waiting for the scepter. And then you have this courtyard, which is the woman's courtyard, and that's where Mordecai would go to check on Esther. And then the women's quarters were back here. This is the Apadana, and the Apadana was a place where he held his banquets. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And this is a garden area where Ahasuerus went to when he was upset at the second banquet. So we don't know where the banquet was held, but it was probably somewhere in this area here. Next slide, please. This is one of the columns that you see here. That column is 15 feet tall. This room in this congregation is approximately 5 meters, or about 16 feet. These columns here were 21 meters, or 68, almost 70 feet. And in the Apadana, there was 6 rows of 6 columns. So you know the height. It was 4 times the height of this to go into that ceremonial room. This is an artist's rendition of the outside. This would be the western side of the Apadana. And you can see the stairs going up. You can see the columns. The outside had 2 rows of 6 columns on the east side, the north side, and the west side. Not the south side, because the south side was into the palace itself. Next slide, please. This is another one at the front, a little bit clearer, so you can see how the steps went up. And all of these were glaze-fired bricks, giving the history of the kings. And there's your columns with your capitals on top. Next slide. This is an artist's rendition of what was been on the inside of the Apadana. What I want you to notice is the size of the people as opposed to the size of the room itself. And the last slide, please. And this is another, but it's that from the top looking down so you can see the people. And that's the other throne that the king had. He had a throne in the Apadana, and he had a throne in the throne room. Now you know that Haman offered the king 10,000 talents of silver to carry out his plan to exterminate the Jews. What's 10,000 talents of silver? Well, the yearly tax revenue of this kingdom, the Achaemenid, was 10,000 to 15,000 talents of silver a year. He offered 10,000 talents. That's like 2/3 of the annual revenue. So how much was that? Well, if a talent is about 75 pounds, it would be 750,000 pounds of silver. To put it in terms we can understand, it's 375 tons of silver. And today's monetary value of that amount would be approximately $922 million. A very, very rich country. Haman sought and received a royal edict from King Ahasuerus to exterminate all the Jews in the Persian Empire. Haman cast lots, or a pur, and that's where we get Purim, for the date of the pogrom, and the lot fell on the 13th day of the month of Adar. Haman's treachery was revealed before that day by Queen Esther, and he was hung on the gallows he had erected for Mordecai. The gallows were 50 cubits in height, or roughly 75 feet. Now, hanging is a more sanitized way of describing the common method of execution in the Persian Empire at that time. I don't know if I want to say it or not, but does everybody know when you impale something? That was the execution. King Ahasuerus issued a second royal edict that the Jews could defend themselves. But why was a second necessary? Well, once a royal edict is issued and sealed by the king, it cannot be rescinded. On the 13th of Adar, the month of the planned attack, the Jews in Shushan killed 500 men, plus the 10 sons of Haman, and many more thousands throughout the empire. Now, we need to talk about the connection between Haman and Mordecai. In the book of Esther, chapter 2, beginning in verse 5, it states that Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, and cousin of Esther, is introduced. In chapter 3, in verse 1, we are told that King Ahasuerus began to single out Haman, the son of Hamdata the Agagi, a descendant of King Agag the Amalekite. It appears that there's a link between the ancestors of Haman and the ancestors of Mordecai in the scriptures. In 1 Samuel chapter 10, we are told that Saul, king of Kish, tribe of Benjamin, is anointed king of Israel by Samuel. It appears that Mordecai has the same ancestral lineage as King Saul. They're both tied to Kish. In 1 Samuel chapter 15, King Saul is commanded by Jehovah to go to war and exterminate the Amalekites, every man, every woman, every child, and all their animals, so that nothing remained. King Saul went to war and did most of what Jehovah commanded, but he didn't do all that was commanded. He did not kill King Agag, and he kept some of the best animals for himself. King Saul's fate was sealed because he disobeyed Jehovah's commandments. There are some sages and scholars that teach that because King Saul, a Benjamite, did not kill King Agag, an Amalekite, as commanded by Jehovah, that these two peoples would meet again at some time in the future. After the Jews were allowed to defend themselves against their attackers on the 13th of Adar, they were victorious in the Persian Empire. King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther what her petition for her people would be. He would grant it, whatever it was. In Esther chapter 9, verse 12 through 14, it states, "And the king said to Queen Esther, in Shushan, the capital, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what further is your request? It shall be fulfilled." And Esther answered, "If it please the king, let the Jews who are in Shushan be allowed tomorrow also to do according to this day's edict." So the king commanded this to be done. A decree was issued in Shushan, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. Queen Esther's request was odd. The 10 sons of Haman were already dead, killed in battle. Why hang them? The sages and the rabbis teach that Esther's request was for a future time, so that she was not addressing her husband, the king, but she was addressing the King of Kings. So let's look at the word tomorrow in Esther's request. The rabbis comment, there is a tomorrow which is now, and there is a tomorrow which is later. In other words, Esther was prophesying that the hanging of Haman's 10 sons would not be a single event, but would be repeated at a future tomorrow as well. Who would these future 10 men be? This is where the story leads us to Germany and the Nazis. Rabbi Elia Shlomo ben Zalman, a prominent Lithuanian rabbi of the 18th century, known as the Vilna Gaon, or the genius of Vilna, was of the opinion that the German nation was descended from Amalek. If you read the book of Esther in an English language Bible, you are not going to see what is obvious in the original Hebrew. This is how it's listed in the book of Esther in the Hebrew. And you notice there's two columns, and the left column has got the word ve'et, with each of the sons' names across in the right column. The vav is a connector, and it usually has the meaning of and the et is not translated into English, but it designates the direct object. In this case, it would be the son. Some sages say the word va'et is used to denote replication. Thus, the conclusion is that another 10 people are to be hung in addition to Haman's 10 sons. According to Nachmanides, known as Rambam, a leading 12th century doctor, scholar, and biblical commentator, in his commentary on Genesis, says any change in the usual way of writing a word or a letter indicates some hidden meaning in the text. So, let's look at how some of the sons' names are written. You notice the first son, Parshantata, the tav in red is smaller than the other letters. Then if you go down to the seventh son is Parmashta, and you notice that the shin in red is also smaller than the other letters. Now in this slide, the tav next to the shin is also small. That does not appear in the normal Tanakh. Does not. And then if you notice the last son, Vaizata, the Zayin, is also red, it's smaller, but by the same token, the Vav in that letter is larger. So when indicating years in Hebrew, 3 letters are usually given. The 4th letter given indicates the millennium. The enlarged Vav in Vaizata's name is thought to refer to the millennium. So, as you know, every Hebrew letter is given a numerical value. It goes 1 to 10, and then 20 to 100, and then 100 to 400. So the Tav has a numerical value of 400, the Shin has a numerical value of 300, and the Zayin has a numerical value of 7. And the Vav has a numerical value of 6, or the 6th millennium. If we total up these numbers, we get a total of 707, or the 707th year of the 6th millennium, which written in Hebrew would be the year 5707. And in the modern day calendar, that year would equate to 1946. Following World War II, 22 Nazi leaders were tried for war crimes and crimes against humanity at Nuremberg, Germany. Starting on November the 20th, 1945, my 4th birthday, thank you. And then October the 1st of 1946, 11 Nazis were sentenced to death by hanging, which is unusual because a normal military protocol was firing squad or electric chair. In other words, hang them appears to have fulfilled the prophecy of Queen Esther. On October the 16th, 1946, my beautiful wife's first birthday, in the early morning hours, the executions were carried out. 11 were to be hung, but 2 hours before the execution, Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring committed suicide. One of the condemned men was a man named Julius Strecker, whose hatred of the Jews was legendary. As he was dragged screaming to the gallows, he screamed out, "Heil Hitler." Standing on the hangman's platform with a rope around his neck, he glared at the witnesses and he proclaimed, Purim Fest 1946. He understood the story of Haman's attempt to exterminate the Jews, and it paralleled the Nazis' attempt to also exterminate the Jews. What is fascinating is they were sentenced on October the 1st, 1946, and that year it was between Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, and hanged on the 16th of October 1946. The 16th was Hoshana Rabbah, Tishri 21, the last great day, which is considered the day of the sealing of the divine judgments. How beautiful is this? What is even more incredible is that the trial had ended several months earlier, but the final verdicts had been postponed because the Nazis appealed for amnesty. Thus, all that was written in the scroll of Esther was fulfilled to the letter. Here's some interesting facts. The Nazis were well aware of the Jewish holiday and used Jewish festivals for particular savagery. These days have become known to the Jews as the Gorbel's calendar, and many atrocities were committed specifically on Purim. In Zdanska, for example, on Purim 1942, 10 Jews were hung by the Nazis in revenge for Haman. The next year, on Purim 1943, the Nazis fooled the Jews at the Piotrkov ghetto, a demonic version of a Purim prank, by asking for 10 Jewish men to volunteer as part of an alleged exchange program for Germans living in Palestine. And then they shot them all. Hitler gave a speech in January the 30th of 1944 where the connection between Haman and the Nazi regime was made. Hitler said that if the Nazis were defeated, the Jews could celebrate a second Purim. Hitler ordered all synagogues locked and barred on Purim. He even outlawed the observance of Purim and declared it a capital offense to possess a copy of the Scroll of Esther. In a speech given on November the 10th of 1938, the day after Kristallnacht, which is the night of broken glass, Nazi Jew hater Julius Strecker spoke to more than 100,000 people at Nuremberg, in which he justified the violence against the Jews with the claim that the Jews had murdered 75,000 Persians in one night and that the Germans would have suffered the same fate if the Jews had been able to accomplish their plan to institute a new murderous Purim in Germany. So what is Kristallnacht? Just before midnight on November the 9th, 1938, Gestapo Chief Heinrich Müller sent a message to all police units informing them that, quote, in shortest order, actions against Jews and especially their synagogues will take place in all of Germany. These are not to be interfered with, unquote. Rather, the police were to arrest the victims. Fire companies stood by synagogues that were burning with explicit instructions to let the buildings burn. They were only to intervene if a fire threatened adjacent Aryan structures. The information encoded within the plain text of the Scroll of Esther is incredible. Only Yehovah, in his wisdom, could inspire these things to be recorded and then cause them to come to pass more than 2,000 years later. Yet he tells us in his word that he can do this. In Isaiah chapter 46, verse 9 and 10, it says, remember the former things of old, for I am Yehovah, and there is no other. I am Yehovah, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. The execution date of 16 October 1946, Hoshana Rabbah, is an important date. According to tradition, during temple times on Hoshana Rabbah, willow branches were leaned against the altar all around. The priest would walk around the altar 7 times while the people recited Hoshiana, save us please, which is Psalm 118, 25, 26, where it says, Ana Yehovah Hoshiana, Ana Yehovah Hatzlichana, Baruch haba b'shem Yehovah, Baruch Nechem bibet Yehovah. In English, please Yehovah, save us now. Please Yehovah, prosper us now. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of Yehovah. We bless you from the house of Yehovah. Nobody needs proof that the Holocaust, the Hashoah, was a significant event or that the Nuremberg convicts were pure evil. What people of faith need is proof that despite the secular world in which we live today, the scriptures are indeed the word of Yehovah. The correspondence between the Megillah's small letters and the Nuremberg trials are meant to prove that Yehovah is indeed in control of the world, and that Esther spoke prophetically about this horrible future slaughter of her people. This, in turn, supports the truth of the Megillah, and by extension, the Torah itself. Thank you.
It is Shabbat, thank the Lord. It is Shabbat, thank the Lord. is Shabbat. Thank the Lord. It is Shabbat. It is Shabbat. Thank the Lord. It is Shabbat. Thank the Lord. It is Shabbat.